It is in the fitness of things that all societies all over the world decided that education ought to have a central place in the scheme of national development. As an educator myself, I am particularly gratified and deeply heartened to see the emphasis on education by societies, governments, and nations throughout the world. I believe that if a nation has to succeed, its education system has to succeed. Education failing, no nation can succeed. For Bhutan, as a country, we have been very fortunate with our leadership. Our enlightened monarchs, right from day one, decided that education ought to be a priority theme for the development of this small country with a very small population perched up in the Himalayas. Right from our first 5-year plan that began in the early 1960s through to today, when we have the 11th 5-year plan underway, education has remained an important factor of national development. We believe that as a small country with a small population, quality has to compensate for quantity. That is why it was important for Bhutan to build schools, colleges and universities, collect our boys and girls, young men and women to our seats of learning and provide as good an education as possible within the limits of a developing economy. Bhutan has a big dream. It has a big message for us Bhutanese people. And we also believe that it could be a message that would be relevant to other people and countries in the world beyond. Our fourth king decided that Bhutan's development path ought to be a little different from the conventional path of development otherwise assessed through the use of gross domestic product. It is our big dream. It is something like our North Star. And if a nation has a big dream, the subsystems of that nation ought to share in that dream. They ought to do their part to advance that dream. Education is an extremely important subsystem of any nation. It ought to be an important instrument in the advancement of the deeply held beliefs and the big dreams of that country. So in 2010, the Ministry of Education decided that it ought to do its part in advancing Bhutan's big dream of gross national happiness. A country having chosen to go in a certain direction ought to be supported by the available resources of the different sectors, and education is an extremely important sector for any nation to advance its dream. We began by holding a very important international seminar by inviting some of the finest thought leaders around the world who had spent many years in thinking about the core purpose of education. Today, all around the world, so much is going on in the name of education, but a lot of it has nothing to do with education. So we thought that we ought to invite together in a common place, on a common platform, thought leaders from all walks of life: education, development, economy, politics, youth volunteerism, and every sector of the society. So as a result of those 10 long days of intensive discussion, deep thought and reflection, we came up with this idea that Bhutan's education system ought to do its part to promote and advance the country's big goal of gross national happiness. So educating for gross national happiness is a big dream for the education system of Bhutan. But this sounds very broad and very general theme, educating for gross national happiness. But to implement this program, we needed a strategy, and the strategy is called building green schools as a means to an end, and the end is green Bhutan. I have to explain what we mean by green. Green is a color, it's a primary color, but it is also a metaphor. For us, green is a metaphor for anything and everything that supports and sustains life. And by life, we mean all kinds of life forms: human life, animal life, plant life, birds, and every manner of life in its infinite variety. So, anything that supports and sustains life, all forms of life in their infinite variety, is green. So, we can have a green school, we can have a green home, we can have green economy, green parliaments, green judiciary, green everything. Green is something that sustains and supports and nourishes life. Today, there's so much going on around the world in the name of education, but a lot of it does not have much to do with education, and that is sad. We know that education has been called the noble sector. No other sector of public service is called the noble sector. Only education, some wise people in the past called the noble sector. And there's a reason for calling it so. Education as an all-embracing, powerful instrument of human development is supposed to help young men and women, boys and girls, cultivate the nobility of their mind, help young men and women cultivate the nobility of their heart, thereby leading to cultivation of nobility of action. And if the head and the heart and hands are engaged in carrying out noble tasks, noble thoughts, noble deeds, we ought to have a great society. We ought to have a beautiful society, a beautiful world. If education had remained the noble sector that it was meant to be, the state of the world today would have been very different. It would have been a lot more beautiful, a lot better world for us to live in. However, education is also based on the principle of hope. It is based on the principle of possibility. So, we still have a life that is worth living. We still have a world that is worth saving and working for. That's why we have to employ all possible means to build an education system so that we are able to guide our young men and women to be not only career conscious but also thoughtful citizens, mindful citizens who will save our societies as well as our planet Earth. So our green schools have at least 8 elements. These 8 elements are something like the claims on the education system. Today's education systems do not serve some of the most important claims of life and learning. At best, today's education system serves the claims of the market, the claims of corporations, the claims of the head, the claims of the heart, and the claims of our deep elements that make us who we are totally disregarded. So the 8 elements of a green school are something like the vital claims on education, on teaching and learning. When we set up schools, colleges and universities as indeed places of learning and gather together the most precious segment of the population, children and youth, education and what we do in our seats of learning ought to have a bigger purpose, a larger purpose than is the case today. That's why we begin with the most basic and the most fundamental claim on teaching and learning, and that is the claim of planet Earth herself. We call it natural greenery or environmental greenery. We belong to this earth, we owe to this earth for our survival, for our nourishment, for our fulfillment. We walk on this earth. We owe it to the earth for our being able to do all that we do on the face of this earth. Build our homes, construct all kinds of infrastructure, but most fundamentally, the earth allows us, in her generosity, to walk on the surface. If the earth were to tell us one fine day, "Don't walk on me," we would be in terrible trouble. We need the water, the vital, life-giving water that Mother Earth gives us. We need the vital, life-giving air that we breathe. We owe it to planet Earth for all that she has given us and continues to give us for our survival, for our nourishment, and for our life. So, young men and women coming to schools, colleges, and universities ought to be able to discover their relationship with the planet Earth. Our boys and girls, young men and women, when they become leaders themselves after school, college, and university, and join the larger society, ought to be able to appreciate the deep connection between us, the human beings, and all the vital elements of planet Earth. So when our young men and women come to our schools, colleges, and universities, the first lesson they must start with is honoring and appreciating the gifts of planet Earth. That must be the first lesson in life. Everything else should come naturally after. The second very important claim that we ought to recognize in education is the claim of the society. We call it social greenery. When young men and women come to schools and colleges and universities, they come not as individuals per se. They bring to schools, colleges, and universities not only their names and identities, but the family comes to the school with them. The society comes to the school with them. And they meet people who they have never met before. At school, they come across other boys and girls, men or women, who they have never met before or made friends with before. But the school is a wonderful place for people not only to study and to learn in, but to make friendship, to create goodwill, to generate positive energy. That must be a place where children celebrate diversity, where they celebrate each other, where they honor each other, where they create positive energy and goodwill, where they build friendship, understanding, trust, solidarity. And when such positive energies are created at school, young men and women will have an altogether different outlook on life and on society, on the world. These people graduating from our schools, colleges, and universities, with these opportunities to build positive energy, goodwill, will continue being the builder of positive energy. They will build friendship, they will build unity, they will build harmony wherever they go in the world as adults and grown-up young men and women. So that's why the school must be a place where young people are able to release, celebrate, and advance positive energy. goodwill, and friendship. Today, a lot that happens in our schools, colleges, and universities does not touch the deep core of learners, their sense of belonging, their sense of solidarity, their sense of fellowship with other human beings. And even though they may graduate with very high scores, great achievements at examinations, very often they could end up as loners, very lonely, alienated people, alienated from themselves, alienated from the community, alienated from the society. So academic success per se is not the end of education. Education ought to make young people more feeling, more seeing, more hearing, and more sensitive, mindful, and thoughtful. That ought to be the purpose of education. So, green schools are dedicated to preparing young men and women to celebrate their special gifts, special talents as members of the society. This is what a green school tries to do. This is the second element, social greenery. But young people are also part of the culture. They belong to a culture. Culture is extremely important. Culture is a vital element in Bhutan because it is what makes us who we are. It gives us a sense of our identity, sense of our uniqueness, and sets us apart from the rest of the world. This is important for many reasons. And it is an extremely important instrument that creates our sense of well-being, a sense of nationhood, a sense of who we are. Culture is the way we are for any society, any system. Culture is the way we do what we do. So culture is the way we proclaim, we announce our identity, our being. So culture is a proclamation of the way we do things, of the way we think. It talks about, it has got to do with our worldview, it's got to do with our outlook, it's got to do with the way we dress, with the way we celebrate ceremonies and rituals and rites. It's the way we play our games, sing our songs, do our dances. It's the way we speak. It is our language, it's our literature, our architecture, our songs and dances, our ceremonies, our rites and rituals, our costumes. All these together make us who we are. This comes within the domain of culture. And culture also talks about our roots. Where do we come from? Or where did we come from? Our philosophy, our faith, our beliefs, all those elements that make us who we are. Culture has got to do with our great minds of the past. Who were our great thinkers, our philosophers, our standard setters? Succeeding generations of young men and women ought to be able to discover their roots, benefit from those roots, and carry on to the future. Education has got an important transmission function, transmission of the wisdom that we have inherited, transmission of the knowledge, the beliefs, the practices, the values, the ideals, the dreams that we have inherited from our ancestors. Education ought to be able to understand and value what we have inherited and transmit it to succeeding generations of citizens. So culture is an extremely important element of any society. It tells us where we have come from, it tells us who we are, it tells us what we believe in, what we do. It talks about our worldview, it talks about what we value deeply inside us. So young men and women ought to be able to appreciate the value of culture. Otherwise today there's so much happening around the world thanks to mass media, thanks to mass advertising. And very often this could lead young people astray, uproot them from their culture, uproot them from their background, uproot them from their history, and they become rootless, estranged individuals, even though they may be in their own societies. That's why understanding, appreciating, and affirming the value of culture, not as something, of a dead system of practices, but as life supporting framework, paradigm to live our lives. So, for a green school, culture or cultural greenery is very important. It allows young men and women to return to their roots so that based on that grounding, they are able to look to the future with hope and confidence. Because culture is what we have. In these changing times, where the future is so uncertain, we have to hold on to what we have. So based on that confidence, we can look to the future with courage. Culture is so important. By the same token, we also believe that ideas are important. It is ideas that have moved the world. It is ideas that have propelled the march of nations and societies. So the fourth element of a green school is intellectual greenery. The great ideas of science, of mathematics, technology, humanities have guided the human race. So intellectual greenery has got to do with keeping the mind open, keeping the mind open to new ideas, new knowledge, new learning. Because succeeding generations of human beings, succeeding generations of the society have added their own share of ideas, knowledge, and discoveries and inventions. So intellectual greenery has got to do with the willingness and readiness to receive new ideas. So we learn and appreciate what we have inherited from earlier generations, but at the same time, young men and women ought to be willing and ready to open their minds to new ideas, new knowledge, new information, and keep themselves abreast of the latest developments in different fields. These ideas, innovations, enterprise, the great march of the human mind that have led to the march of societies and nations ought to be brought to the classroom. So a green school has got to be intellectually green. Otherwise, we would have massive infrastructure, state-of-the-art technology, great buildings, architecture. But what is going on inside those buildings? What kind of ideas are circulating? What kind of discussions happen in the classrooms, on the corridors, in the meeting rooms, in offices? That is important. So ideas have to animate our institutions. Ideas have to bring alive our resources, our facilities, state-of-the-art equipment that we have. On their own, they have no life. Their life comes from people who come and breathe life into institutions. So that's why the need to keep ourselves and the young people who come to our schools, colleges, and universities intellectually alive is critical. That is a very important reason why we start schools, colleges, and universities, places of learning. So the fourth element, cultural greenery, is so very important. Conventional education that we have received so far, does a good job of sharpening the brain, which is important, but it ought to do more, because the brain or the human mind is only one of the many elements that make us who we are. Life is full, life is various, life is abundant, and this plenitude of life, this abundance of life, This variety of life ought to be celebrated in our schools and colleges. Today, unfortunately, we are focusing only on the intellect. And to the extent that we do that, our learning and our educational accomplishments become very narrow. That's why we need these elements. When we come to school, we have to discover how knowledge is packaged. Acquiring knowledge, appreciating knowledge, and making use of that knowledge is an important reason why we build schools, colleges, and universities, and collect young men and women, boys and girls, the most precious segment of the society. Over the past many years till today, we have believed that sciences are important, humanities are important, social studies are important, mathematics, technology, all these are important. Without asking any question, we have inherited physics and the other sciences. We have been teaching biology for 1,000 years without ever asking what is the nature of biology, what is the nature of chemistry, what is the nature of physics. How does literature differ from language? What is it that makes history and not chemistry? What is it that makes geography what it is and not something else? What is at the heart of these disciplines? How did somebody decide to package knowledge in a certain way and call it biology or chemistry or literature or information technology? When we bring our young men and women to schools, they ought to be led to discover the nature of these disciplines. What is the power in these disciplines? These academic studies, rather than learning the information that is inherent in these disciplines, it is important and necessary to make meaning out of these disciplines, to make learning come close to the learner. So, when we have understood where we stand in relation to the environment, when the children have understood that they belong to the society and they ought to cultivate positive energy and goodwill when they are in the school, when they have learned that they belong to these important cultural roots, when they have understood the power of ideas, now we are in a position to open the book. On page 1, chapter 1, I call it academic greenery. Academic greenery deals with the many subjects, the disciplines, the different fields of investigation that we bring to the school, the college or the university. And these are important. We have received these important disciplines from generations that have gone ahead of us. And for a long time to come, we will continue teaching these subjects. But rather than follow a ritual, it's important to engage with the power inherent in these disciplines. This I call academic greenery. Academic greenery has got to do with exploring, cultivating, and appreciating the learning, the knowledge, and the power inherent in the many disciplines that we study at school. That I call academic greenery. But this is not all. In life, there are so many things that make our living one of joy. There are things that we need to live our lives on a day-to-day basis. But life is more than survival. There are other elements that give us joy and bring meaning and purpose and worth. And these are our hobbies. These are our likes and dislikes, our tastes, hobbies that extend the scope of our life, that add nuance and meaning to our life. We may love music. Music is so powerful. There's so much happening in the field of technology, innovation. Sometimes they could sweep us overboard. And young people are particularly vulnerable to the negative influences of technology. Technology brings in a lot of positive benefits. It has improved our lives. It has done so much good to the human race. But at the same time, if young children are not able to differentiate between the positive and negative influences of technology, they could come to a point where they lose their identity in favor of technology. So, educational institutions, education systems ought to do one thing by all means. That is that they have to protect the integrity of the learner. They have to protect the uniqueness of the individual being. How do we do that? We do that by reminding our children, our youth, of their own inherent talents, inherent gifts, inherent potentials. Technology comes from outside. That is an external force. But the external factors overpowering the internal gifts, the inherent potentials and gifts of young children will be extremely damaging. That's why we have to create space for young men and women to go back into themselves, to return to their inner selves, to listen to their inner voice. There have got to be moments of reflection. There have got to be moments of meditation. There have got to be moments of contemplation. There have got to be room for art, for music, for sports, for games. Moments where children can go out and walk on the surface of this beautiful earth. They ought to be able to listen to the sounds, smell the beautiful fragrance, and understand what this beautiful nature has given to us. But today, thanks to technology, there's so much happening around children and youth that can often suck the soul out of our children without their ever realizing what has happened to them. That is dangerous and anti-educational. This anti-life. That's why we have to protect and preserve the integrity, the identity, and the honor and sanctity of the learner. I call it aesthetic greenery. Aesthetics is so very important, especially at a time like today when there is an amazing array of influences, many of which are very negative and destructive. So we have to secure the integrity and the identity and the honor and sacredness of the learner. This particular element, this vital element of aesthetics, helps in securing that integrity of the individual learner. So, the claim of aesthetics on teaching and learning is absolutely important, and we have to understand and honor that. Human beings are also spiritual beings. Spirituality doesn't have anything to do with religiosity or religions. We are all spiritual beings in our own way. Spirituality is an acceptance of the fact that as we are not full. As we are not perfect. As we are not complete. But we gain ever greater sense of completion and perfection and fullness if we tend towards what is good, what is pure, and what is perfect. Just as the flower kept on the windowsill tends towards the sun to receive nourishment and find fulfillment, in the same way, young people ought to have opportunities to tend towards what is good, what is beautiful, and what is truthful. See. So, spirituality or spiritual greenery is an acceptance of the fact that our incompletion can find fullness and completion in association with something greater than us, something better than us, something holier and more complete than us. There ought to be opportunities. And this could be our teachers, who we believe in, who we respect, who we think know more than us, who we think are better than us. It could be our parents. It could be our root master. It could be an object of nature. It could be God. Anything that we consider to be a model, to be an idol, to be a standard towards which we can tend to. See. So, spiritual greenery is an acceptance of our own incompletion, but the need to find greater fulfillment and completion. Cultivation of spiritual greenery allows young people to moderate their ego, to moderate their aggressiveness and self-centeredness. Because a lot of young people could be very egoistic. They could be aggressive. They could be self-centered. Because they do not know that there are other beings who are better than them, superior to them, more sacred than them. So this opportunity to appreciate, to discover those standards that are better than them, allows them also to moderate their ego. They become more humble. They become more accepting. They become more human. And humanization, spiritualization of our life is a great achievement. Education ought to aim for a greater sense of fulfillment in the children. They're so beautiful. There's so much in their life. But in most systems, they do not find the opportunity to bloom and to blossom. This is my green school, where spirituality is also an important element to give people a sense of fulfillment. Finally, a green school ought to be ethically upright. Ethically upright. I call it moral greenery. Moral greenery has got to do with an ability to distinguish between categories of values. And what are these values? These are standards that allow us to distinguish between right and wrong. We have got accustomed to believing that there is something called right as opposed to something called wrong. The ability to distinguish between these categories of right and wrong is a tremendous ability. Only we human beings possess this ability. We've got accustomed to believing that there is something called good as opposed to something called bad. There's something called right as opposed to something called wrong. The ability to distinguish between the category of right and wrong, truth and falsehood, is a tremendous ability and a gift that only we human beings of all the species have received. This is what distinguishes us, this ability, from other lower order animals or species. Young people who come to our schools, colleges and universities, our places of learning, ought to be able to reflect on these categories of values, right and wrong, good and bad, truth and falsehood. Otherwise, a time could come when there will be no distinctions. Young people becoming leaders after college or university will not mind being corrupt, being greedy. That will reduce them. Greed and corruption. Greed will seduce them to do all kinds of things and reduce them and impoverish them. They will dehumanize young people. So, young people who are mindful of right action, who are mindful of the need to be truthful and honest and sincere, will become good leaders. And we need good leaders in the world. We need good leaders in the society. They will not fall for anything and everything. They will not be corrupt. If our schools and colleges and universities are able to prepare young men and women who will not fall for anything and everything, who will have the strength of character to stand on their own, who will stand for good and right and truth, will be powerful leaders, ethical leaders, mindful leaders. And our societies and our nations and the world need these. So in my green school, there ought to be consideration for these different claims: natural greenery, natural claim, social claim, cultural claim, intellectual claim, academic claim, aesthetic claim, spiritual claim, and ethical or moral claim. We feel that as life is various and not limited to one single concentrated point, it is only right and necessary that young men and women, our youth who come to our schools, colleges and universities, ought to be able to open up and celebrate the diverse potentials and the gifts that they have. This is a more integrated, more holistic and more fulfilling system of learning that young people deserve. And I feel that if we are able to address these vital claims of life and learning and a planet Earth, we have a good education system. We have a good society, because young men and women graduating from a school or college or university that takes into account the vital claims of all these elements will certainly produce and prepare young people who will be fit for the society, will be fit for the world. They will be our leaders in the real sense of the term. This is my green school. Yes.